So with that, we move on to our next talk for the day. Wyatt Zabinski, who will be giving a talk about Adriana nimigracilis, a new species from Mexico.
All right, so hello everybody. Thanks for coming to my presentation on Andrena nimigracilis, a new species from Mexico. So just a quick background about me. I'm a PhD student at University of Kansas, and I'm in the start of my second year. My PhD project is set up to work on some Andrena species in the southwestern United States. And during my master's research, I learned a lot with taxonomy and describing species from morphology. And so that's a lot of the research I've focused on so far with Andrena and Strepsiptera. But during my PhD work right now, I'm learning some other methods such as like phylogenetics and niche modeling and stuff like that. And so moving on, the Andrena bees. So Andrena is one of the most diverse genera in the world. There's currently 1,619 species, with 476 of those roughly found in North America. And it's been estimated that there's going to be around 2,000 species or more once they're all discovered. So there's still a lot more left to do within the genus just for species discovery. And then the bulk of the modern taxonomic foundation for North American Andrena was conducted by professor and researcher Wallace LaBerge, mainly during the 1960s and 80s. That's when he did the majority of his species descriptions. And he created extensive keys on how to identify the different subgenera of Andrena and then to the species level. And the life history for Andrena is they're solitary bees, so the females will build a nest in the ground. And there's some variation to their level of solitariness. So there's none that are eusocial, but there's some where they'll be completely just solitary, where the females are building a nest in the ground, kind of really spread apart. There's some that are communal, which means the females will share a nest entrance, but then beneath that, they're not working together, cooperating in any way. The females are just digging their own tunnels and creating their own nests underground. And then also there's some that will live in aggregates. So some species will have a soil preference and there'll just be a dense colony of females in close proximity within that substrate forming their nests. And as you can see in this figure down here, Andrena have mainly a holarctic distribution, so they're mainly found in the northern hemisphere, and this goes hand in hand with how they're generally found in colder regions and higher elevations. And many people may know Andrena as being these oligolectic species, so like specialized on a specific plant species or genus or family. But there's also variation with across the genus, where there's some that are polylectic that are more generalists. And so, just a quick background, I want to go through the general morphology for the family Andrenidae and then to the level of Andrena. And so all Andrenids, as you can see here in this figure, um, so you can see in this figure, they'll have two subantennal sutures. So that's just these two sutures right underneath the antennae. And then over here in this second figure, right here, there's this structure called the facial fovea. So it's kind of these grooves on the face, and they'll typically be covered in hairs, as you can see here. And then in general, Andrenids will have shorter tongues and mouth parts. And then moving on to for the genus Andrena, these are the main characters to get to the genus is the hind trochanter. So this structure right here is going to have a flocus, which is just this dense tuft of hairs. Then the hind bassotarsus, this structure right here is always going to be more than half as long as the hind tibia. And then on the forewing, there's the structure called the stigma, is almost always going to be broader than the prestigma. And then lastly, again, with the facial fovea, especially in the females, they're going to be dense and long velvety hairs, as you can see in this figure. And so now moving on to the new species. This species I described and has been published in the Journal of Melitology. So here's the link for that in the citation. But so roughly a year ago when I first arrived at KU, given my background on morphology, identifying Andrena species, I decided to go through all the specimens I could and start pulling them. And I'm still doing that now from the Southwestern United States and Mexico in the collection. And this was one of the first specimens that stood out to me because it was really small, skinny, and just abnormal looking for an Andrena. And it had a det label as Andrena, but it didn't say who identified it to that. But I thought it was really strange and probably wasn't an Andrena, and so I investigated it further. And it was this single male specimen from Michoacan, Mexico. And so, to determine if this was a known species or try to get it to at least the subgenus level, I used Michener's Bees of the World book and then some of Liburge's keys. And with Andrena, because they're so diverse, the first thing you do is go through a key to get to the subgenus typically. And then from there, you can go to keys to the subgenus to get to the species level. And so when I was going through the key, this species, its morphology didn't match any of the known subgenera, but it seemed most similar to this one subgenus, Andrena, which is interestingly composed of just one species described by LaBerge and Hurd in 1965. And this species is also found in a neighboring kind of region of Mexico, in the neighboring state, as to where this specimen was found. And so I did further investigating, determined that this was an Andrena, and it was definitely a new species based on the morphology. And here's some of the main characters for the species. And I'm just going to go through a few of these. So the first is the metasoma is extremely narrow, has a really weak humeral angle, but it does have one. The propodium is declivitous, and the genal area is small. And so they kind of show what those characters are in this first figure here, where the arrow is pointing. This structure is the gena. And so what's done a lot for the morphology of Andrena is you look at this lateral view and we'll compare the width of the gena to the width of the eye in lateral view. And in most cases, in Andrena, the width of the gena is pretty much equal to the width of the eye in lateral view, or it's also larger. So as you can see in this species, it's much narrower than the eye, and the eye is really wide in this lateral view, which is really kind of abnormal for Andrena. Then in this second figure here, you can see the propodium. So it's declivitous, meaning it has this gradual sloping decline. So typically in Andrena, there's going to be a distinct kind of top end with a steep drop off to the bottom end. And so as this one, you can see it's just really gradual sloping. And then the last structure is the metasoma here, the abdomen. So you can see it's extremely narrow, which is just, again, kind of abnormal for most Andrena. And so once I described the species and tried to decide what to name it, I was first going to name it Andrena gracilis just because of that thin metasoma. But I ended up finding out that that name is already taken for an Andrena species and has since been synonymized with another species. So I did some further investigating in the Latin dictionary and found the word nimis, which means too much, or excessively. So I thought that would work for Andrena nimigracilis, meaning excessively thin. And so for the diagnosis, I went back and did further investigating into that species Andrena venula, described by LaBerge and Hurd in 1965, and found that this is the species that nimigracilis is most similar to based on the morphology. And this is because they share many main characteristics. So here's some of the main ones where they both have that declivitous propodium, pronotum with humeral angle, and their antennae are long, extending beyond the tegula. But there are differing characters. So nimigracilis has a narrow gena, that abnormally narrow gena. The abdomen's extremely narrow. On the labial palps, the first segment's flattened, and the compound eyes are wide compared to its length. And so within my paper, I put a little addition to the subgenre key that kind of highlights those character differences between Andrena venula and nimigracilis, and that kind of just sums up those character differences to be able to identify it. And so overall, this species is just known from the one single male specimen I found in the collection here, and the female is still unknown. There's nothing known about the biology of the species besides that was collected in the fall and found at a relatively higher elevation. And what I've been told is in the part of Mexico where it's been found is an area that where it's unlikely to be able to go collect anytime soon in the future to maybe find more specimens. But my hope is that that more specimens may be found in other collections in other museums, and that the female will be found. And it'd be really interesting to see what the female looks like, because I think that could help solidify what subgenus that this species would fit into. Because I think it may fit into Select Andrena potentially, if the female's found, or it could be a new subgenre altogether. But until just more data is found, there's no way to fully determine that. And thank you all for listening to my presentation. Special thanks to Victor Gonzalez, who's my co-advisor here at University of Kansas, helped guide me through this, my first bee species description. And then also thanks to Favizia and John Neff for providing feedback and advice during this species description. Also like to thank University of Kansas for providing all the resources to do this. And this work was supported by the National Science Foundation. And here's my email. So anyone that's watching, if you ever find interesting Andrena species or strepsipterans, feel free to contact me. I'm always looking for people to collaborate with. And thanks again.